The champagne cork popped at exactly 7:47 p.m., and in that moment, my 10-year marriage died. Jessica raised her glass toward the man sitting across from us at our anniversary dinner table, her eyes sparkling with an excitement I hadn't seen directed at me in years. "To Brad Coleman," she announced, loud enough for the entire Celestial rooftop restaurant to hear. "The new Senior Vice President of Southwest Regional Bank." The clink of their glasses echoed through my chest like a funeral bell. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. I sat there, forked halfway to my mouth, watching my wife celebrate another man's success at our 10th anniversary dinner. The irony wasn't lost on me that I'd spent 3 weeks planning this evening, calling ahead to reserve the best table with the Phoenix skyline view, ordering her favorite dessert in advance, even coordinating with the restaurant to have our wedding song played during dinner. Instead, I was witnessing Jessica's genuine joy for someone else's achievement while she'd barely acknowledged the surprise trip to Napa I'd booked for next weekend. The evening had started innocently enough. Jessica had suggested we invite Brad and his wife Nicole to join us for our anniversary dinner, claiming it would be more fun with friends. I should have recognized the red flag immediately. The married couple wants other people at their anniversary celebration. But like the devoted husband I'd trained myself to be over the years, I'd agreed without question. After all, keeping Jessica happy had become my primary occupation. Brad Coleman wasn't just any friend. He was Jessica's boss at Southwest Regional Bank, a smooth-talking executive with silver hair and the kind of confidence that came from never having to worry about money. At 45, he was 8 years older than us, recently divorced, and, according to Jessica's frequent mentions, going through such a difficult time. She'd been staying late at work more often lately, helping him with important projects and transition planning. I'd even encouraged it, proud that my wife was so dedicated to her career. The promotion announcement had come that afternoon. Jessica had called me at Mitchell & Park Digital Marketing Agency, barely containing her excitement. "Ryan, you'll never believe it. Brad got the VP position. We have to celebrate tonight." The enthusiasm in her voice was infectious, and I'd found myself genuinely happy for them both. It never occurred to me to question why she was more excited about her boss's promotion than she'd been about our agency landing the Henderson Group account last month. Now, watching her lean forward as Brad recounted his meeting with the board of directors, I noticed details that had been invisible to me before. The way she hung on his every word. How she'd chosen the red dress I'd bought her for our anniversary last year, but had saved it for tonight when Brad would see her in it. The subtle way she'd positioned herself in the chair so her body was angled toward him instead of me. Most telling of all was the genuine laughter bubbling from her lips at his mediocre jokes, while my attempts at humor lately had earned nothing but polite smiles. Nicole Coleman sat beside her husband with the resigned expression of someone who'd learned to accept being overlooked. She was a pleasant woman, quiet and thoughtful, who worked as a nurse at Phoenix General. Throughout dinner, she made several attempts to steer the conversation toward topics that might include everyone. But Jessica and Brad seemed to exist in their own bubble of inside jokes and shared references to people and situations Nicole and I knew nothing about. Remember when Thompson from accounting tried to challenge the quarterly projections? Brad was saying, his hand gesturing dramatically. Jessica absolutely destroyed his arguments with those demographic studies she'd prepared. I knew right then I was working with someone special. Jessica blushed at the compliment, a soft pink spreading across her cheeks. "I just did my research," she said with false modesty. Though I have to admit, seeing Thompson's face when he realized he hadn't done his homework was pretty satisfying. They shared a look that lasted just a beat too long, and I felt something cold settle in my stomach. It was the same look Jessica and I used to share when we were dating. Those moments of connection that made you feel like you were the only two people in the world. When had we stopped looking at each other like that? "You two make quite the team," Nicole observed, and I caught something sharp beneath her polite tone. She'd noticed it too. "The best team," Brad agreed, raising his glass. "Again, to my invaluable partner, Jessica Mitchell." This time, I didn't raise my glass. Neither did Nicole. As the evening progressed, I found myself studying my wife as if seeing her for the first time. Jessica had always been beautiful, with dark hair that caught the light and green eyes that could be warm or calculating depending on her mood. Tonight, those eyes were definitely warm, but not for me. She'd spent an hour getting ready, trying on 3 different outfits before settling on the red dress. I'd assumed she was making an effort for our anniversary, but now I realized the effort had been for him. The conversation flowed around topics I couldn't contribute to: bank politics, office personalities, industry changes that affected their department. Jessica had never talked shop this much at home. When I tried to share a story about a challenging client we'd recently won over, the response was polite, but disinterested. Brad managed to steer the conversation back to banking within minutes. "Speaking of challenging clients," he said, with a knowing smile at Jessica, "remember the Hoffman account? The way you handled that situation was masterful. Pure poetry in motion." Jessica laughed, her hand briefly touching Brad's arm. "You're exaggerating." Though I have to admit, watching his face when I presented the alternative financing structure was pretty rewarding. "That's when I knew," Brad continued, his voice dropping to something more intimate despite our presence. "That's when I knew. You were exactly what our department needed. What I needed." The words hung in the air like smoke. Nicole had gone very still beside Brad, her knuckles white around her wine glass. I felt like I was watching a movie where I'd missed the first hour and couldn't follow the plot. Our server appeared with dessert, the special anniversary chocolate souffle I'd arranged. Why? It arrived with a small sparkler on top and a card that read, "Congratulations on 10 beautiful years." The irony was suffocating. Ow. Jessica barely glanced at it before turning back to Brad's story about his first week in the new position. "Monday morning, I'm implementing some changes," Brad was saying. "New protocols, fresh perspective, and I'm going to need someone I can absolutely trust to help me navigate the transition." "Whatever you need," Jessica responded immediately. "You know I'm completely committed to him." The phrase echoed in my mind as I mechanically ate the dessert I could no longer taste. When had Jessica ever described herself as completely committed to our marriage, to our family, to anything involving me? The final blow came as we were preparing to leave. Brad stood to help Jessica with her coat, his hands lingering on her shoulders just a moment longer than necessary. "Thank you for tonight," he said, looking directly into her eyes. "Having you here to celebrate with me means everything." "Congratulations again," she replied softly. "You deserve this, Brad. You deserve everything good." I cleared my throat, reminding them of my existence. "Well, this was fun," I said, injecting false cheer into my voice. "We should do it again sometime." "Absolutely," Brad agreed, but he was still looking at Jessica. "Though next time it's my treat. Can't have you paying for your own anniversary dinner, except I was the one who'd paid. I was the one who'd planned everything. I was the one whose anniversary it actually was. But somehow I'd become invisible. In my own celebration, as we waited for the valet to bring our cars around, Nicole touched my arm gently. "Ryan," she said quietly, "could I talk to you for a moment?" I stepped aside while Jessica and Brad continued their animated discussion about Monday's upcoming meetings. Nicole's face was kind but sad in the soft light from the restaurant entrance. "I'm sorry about tonight," she said simply. "Sorry about what?" I asked, though I already knew. She gave me a look that said we both understood exactly what she was. "Apologizing for if you ever need someone to talk to," she continued. "Someone who understands what it's like to feel invisible in your own life. I'm here." Before I could respond, the valet arrived with our car. Jessica slid into the passenger seat, immediately pulling out her phone to text someone. I had a sinking suspicion I knew. The drive home was quiet, except for the soft sound of Jessica's fingers on her phone screen. We lived in a beautiful house in Scottsdale. It's the kind of place I'd always dreamed of owning when I was growing up in a cramped apartment with my single father. Tom Mitchell had worked 2 jobs to give me opportunities, and I'd built Mitchell & Park Agency from nothing into something he could be proud of. The success had allowed us to buy this house, take nice vacations, give our daughter Sophie everything she needed. But sitting in my driveway, looking at the house I'd worked so hard to provide, I felt like a stranger visiting someone else's life. That was a wonderful evening, Jessica said as we walked to the front door, finally putting her phone away. Brad really needed friends around him tonight. He's been so stressed about the promotion. It's our anniversary, I said quietly. I know that, she replied, but her tone suggested I was being petty for bringing it up. But sometimes we need to be there for the people who matter to us. The people who matter to us. It's not her husband of 10 years, not the father of her child. Brad Coleman mattered to her now. Inside, we found our babysitter reading on the couch. Sophie was already asleep, having been tucked in hours ago. Mrs. Garcia had been watching Sophie since she was 3, and she greeted us with her usual warm smile. "How was your anniversary dinner?" she asked. "Perfect," Jessica answered before I could speak. "Just perfect." After Mrs. Garcia left, Jessica headed straight for our bedroom, claiming exhaustion. I stayed downstairs in my home office, staring at the photos on my desk. Our wedding day, Sophie's birth, family vacations, Christmas mornings. When had Jessica stopped looking at me the way she looked at Brad tonight? When had I become an afterthought? In my own marriage? I pulled out my laptop and did something I'd never thought I'd do. I started researching Brad Coleman. What I found made my blood run cold. His divorce had been finalized 6 months ago. His ex-wife had cited irreconcilable differences. But a deeper search through public records revealed she'd also filed a restraining order that was later dropped. The man my wife was so excited about had a history I was just beginning to uncover. But it wasn't until I stumbled across a photo from the bank's company holiday party 3 months ago that everything clicked into place. There was Jessica, radiant, in a green dress I'd never seen, standing close to Brad at what was clearly an intimate gathering. Her hand was on his chest, his arm around her waist, and they were looking at each other with an intensity that made my chest ache. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. The photo was dated 2 weeks after Jessica had told me she was working late for an important project. The same night she'd come home smelling like expensive cologne that wasn't mine. I sat in my office until dawn, pieces of a puzzle I'd been too trusting to see finally falling into place. The late nights at work, the new clothes she'd bought without mentioning them, the way she'd started keeping her phone face down during dinner, the distance that had grown between us that I'd attributed to the natural evolution of a long marriage. Jessica wasn't just celebrating Brad's promotion. She was celebrating the man she'd already chosen to replace me. The Scottsdale Mountains. I realized that our anniversary dinner hadn't been the end of my marriage. It had been the funeral, and I'd been the only one who didn't know the patient was already dead. But what Jessica didn't know, what none of them knew, was that I was about to get a crash course in resurrection. And this time, I wouldn't be the fool paying for my own funeral. The morning after our anniversary dinner, I woke up on the couch in my office with a crick in my neck and a clarity I hadn't felt in years. Jessica had already left for work, taking Sophie to school on her way. The house felt different somehow, like I was seeing it through new eyes. The family photos that had once brought me comfort now felt like evidence of a life I'd been sleepwalking through. I called Kevin at the office and told him I'd be late. Kevin Park had been my business partner for 5 years. We'd built Mitchell & Park Digital Marketing from a 2-man operation into a thriving agency with 12 employees. He was also one of the few people who knew me well enough to hear the change in my voice. "Everything okay, man?" he asked.
Oh.
"You sound different." "Everything's about to change," I replied, and for the first time in months, I felt excited about something. Instead of heading to the office, I drove to a coffee shop downtown where I could think without interruption. I needed to understand exactly what I was dealing with before I made any moves. My phone buzzed with a text from Jessica. "Working late again tonight. Important client meeting with Brad. Don't wait up." The audacity was breathtaking. She wasn't even trying to be subtle anymore. I spent the next 3 hours researching everything I could find about Brad Coleman and his history with my wife. Social media posts, professional networking sites, even the bank's internal newsletter archives Kevin had helped me access through a mutual client. The picture that emerged was of a man who'd made a career of charm and manipulation, leaving a trail of broken professional relationships and at least 2 documented harassment complaints that had been quietly settled. But the real revelation came when I cross-referenced Jessica's work schedule with Brad's calendar, which was publicly visible through the bank's client portal. Every late night, every weekend project, every important meeting perfectly aligned. With his availability, they'd been conducting their affair with the precision of a business merger, right under my nose. By noon, I'd made 3 decisions that would change everything. First, I was going to document every piece of evidence I could find. Second, I was going to protect my assets and my daughter before Jessica realized I knew. Third, I was going to stop being the devoted husband who made everyone else's life easier while my own fell apart. The transformation started with something simple. I went to a barbershop I'd never visited before, in a part of town where no one knew me. The elderly barber, a man named Tony, with steady hands and knowing eyes, took one look at me and asked, "Bad day or new beginning?" "New beginning," I said without hesitation. When he finished, I barely recognized myself in the mirror. The carefully maintained businessman's cut was gone, replaced by something sharper, more confident. It was the kind of haircut that said I had places to be and people to impress, rather than the safe, forgettable style I'd worn for years to avoid standing out. Next, I drove to a men's store I'd always avoided because Jessica said it was too expensive. The sales associate, a young woman named Carmen with an eye for style, helped me select clothes that actually fit my personality instead of my role as Jessica's agreeable husband. Dark jeans that fit properly, shirts that didn't hide my frame, a leather jacket that made me feel like someone who could handle whatever came next. "Special occasion?" Carmen asked as I paid for everything. "You could say that," I replied. "I'm celebrating my divorce." She raised an eyebrow. "Congratulations." "Thanks. I think it's going to be the best thing that ever happened to me." The confidence in my voice surprised even me. For the first time in years, I wasn't apologizing for taking up space or asking permission to exist in my own life. I arrived at the office looking like a different person, and Kevin's reaction told me everything I needed to know. He did a double take when I walked in, then grinned like he'd been waiting for this moment for years. "There he is," he said. I was wondering when the real Ryan Mitchell would show up. "Do you mean?" Kevin leaned back in his chair. "Dude, you've been walking around here like a ghost for the past 2 years, apologizing for everything, second-guessing yourself, asking Jessica's permission before making business decisions. It's been painful to watch. I thought I'd been hiding it better than that." "You never said anything?" "What was I supposed to say? Hey buddy, your wife is turning you into a doormat. You had to figure it out yourself." Kevin was right, and we both knew it. I'd been so focused on keeping Jessica happy that I'd lost sight of who I was before I became her husband. The irony was that the harder I'd tried to please her, the less interested she'd become. "Well, I've figured it out," I said, "and I'm going to need your help with something." I told Kevin everything. The anniversary dinner, the research I'd done, the evidence I'd gathered. By the time I finished, his expression had shifted from concern to something much more intense. "That's some serious betrayal," he said. "What's your plan?" "I'm going to protect myself and Sophie first. Then I'm going to show Jessica what it feels like to lose something important." Kevin nodded slowly. "Whatever you need, you've got it. This agency is as much yours as mine, and I'm not about to let some cheating banker's wife take half of what we've built." That afternoon, I met with Carlos Torres, a lawyer who specialized in family law. Carlos had a reputation for being thorough, discreet, and absolutely ruthless when the situation called for it. His office was in a modern building downtown, all glass and steel that projected success and confidence. "Mr. Mitchell," he said as we shook hands, "my assistant mentioned you're dealing with a sensitive situation." "My wife is having an affair with her boss," I said directly. "I have documentation, and I need to know what my options are." Carlos had been practicing family law for 15 years, and his expression told me he'd heard worse. "Owie." "To try to save the marriage, or are you looking at divorce?" "Divorce. Definitely divorce. But I want to make sure I protect my daughter and my business interests." Smart man. Too many people wait until the emotions take over and make decisions they regret later. We spent 2 hours going through every detail of my marriage, my business, and my financial situation. Carlos was impressed with the evidence I'd gathered and the fact that I'd come to him before doing anything dramatic. "You're in a strong position," he said finally. "Arizona is a no-fault state, but adultery can still impact asset division and custody arrangements. The fact that she's having an affair with her supervisor could also create some interesting employment law complications." "What do you mean?" "If she's receiving preferential treatment at work because of their relationship, that's a form of workplace discrimination. Other employees could have grounds for complaints. The bank could face serious liability if this becomes public." I felt a smile spread across my face. "How public are we talking?" "That depends on how far you want to take this." By the time I left Carlos's office, I had a clear strategy. File for divorce, seek full custody of Sophie based on Jessica's increasingly erratic behavior and poor judgment, and ensure that both Jessica and Brad faced professional consequences for their affair. It wasn't about revenge, though. I'd be lying if I said that wasn't part of it. It was about making sure that people who thought they could take advantage of others faced real consequences. The next step was perhaps the most important. I needed to secure my relationship with Sophie before Jessica had a chance to poison it. My daughter was 8 years old, smart and perceptive, and she'd already started asking questions about why Mommy was always working and why Daddy seemed sad all the time. I picked Sophie up from school myself that day, something I hadn't done in months. Her face lit up when she saw me waiting by the playground, and the genuine joy in her expression reminded me what I was really fighting for.
"Daddy, you're here."
She ran toward me with her backpack bouncing behind her. "I'm here, sweetheart. How was school?" "Good. We learned about fractions, and I got an A on my science project about plants." "That's amazing. I'm so proud of you." We drove to her favorite ice cream place and over chocolate chip cookie dough cones. I had one of the most important conversations of my life. "Sophie," I said carefully, "you know how sometimes grown-ups have to make difficult decisions?" She nodded, suddenly serious. "Like when you and Mommy talk in quiet voices after I go to bed?" My heart ached. She'd been aware of the tension all along. Sometimes people change and families have to change too. But no matter what happens, I want you to know that I love you more than anything in the world, and that will never change. "Are you and Mommy getting divorced?" she asked with the directness that only children possess. "We might be," I said. "Honestly, how do you feel about that?" Sophie considered this while eating her ice cream. "Tommy's parents got divorced last year," she said finally. "He was sad at first, but now he says he likes having 2 bedrooms and getting to pick which parent he wants to spend weekends with. Would you be okay if something like that happened to us?" "As long as I still get to see you all the time," she said, "and as long as you don't become one of those sad daddies who only sees their kids every other weekend." "Never," I promised. "You're stuck with me, kiddo." That evening, Jessica came home at nearly 10 o'clock, claiming the client meeting had run late and then she'd had to finish up some paperwork. She barely glanced at me as she headed straight for the shower, but she stopped short when she noticed my new haircut. "You look different," she said, and there was something wary in her voice. "I got tired of looking the same," I replied. "I thought it was time for a change." She paused, searching for the right word, dramatic. "Good, I was going for dramatic." She studied my face as if trying to figure out what had shifted. "Is everything okay? You seem different too." "Everything's perfect," I said with a smile that I knew didn't reach my eyes. "How was your meeting with Brad?" "Fine," she said. "Quickly, just business stuff. You know how it is." "Actually, I don't," I said. "You never talk about work anymore, at least not to me." Jessica's cheeks flushed slightly. "I've been busy. The promotion means more responsibility for everyone. In the department, I'm sure it does. Brad's lucky to have such a dedicated employee." There was a moment of silence where we stared at each other across the kitchen, and I could see her trying to figure out if there was a hidden meaning in my words. There was, but I wasn't ready to show my hand yet. "I'm exhausted," she said. "Finally, I'm going to bed. Sweet dreams." I called after her, and I meant it. She was going to need all the rest she could get for what was coming. The next few days fell into a new pattern. Jessica continued her late nights and weekend work sessions, becoming increasingly bold about her lies. I continued documenting everything while presenting the facade of a husband. who was too trusting to notice what was happening right in front of him. But I was also making other changes. I started going to the gym regularly, something I'd abandoned years ago when work and family responsibilities took over. I updated my wardrobe completely, donating the conservative clothes Jessica had always preferred and replacing them with things that made me feel confident and attractive. I even bought a new car, trading in the practical sedan for a sleek BMW. That made me smile every time I saw it in the parking garage. Kevin noticed the changes immediately. "You're like a different person," he said one afternoon as we reviewed client proposals. "Whatever you're doing, keep doing it." "I'm just remembering who I used to be," I said, "before I got so worried about being the perfect husband that I forgot to be myself." The real test came on Friday night when Jessica announced she'd be working late again. "Important presentation Monday morning," she said, as she applied lipstick in the hallway mirror. "Brad wants the whole team to review everything one more time on a Friday night?" I asked innocently. "You know how demanding he is," she replied, "but it's worth it. Working for someone like Brad is a real opportunity. I'm sure it is." After she left, I called Amanda Torres, the interior designer who'd been Jessica's best friend since college. Amanda and I had always gotten along well, but we'd rarely spent time together without Jessica present. Tonight was going to be different. "Ryan." Amanda sounded surprised when she answered her phone. "Is everything okay?" "I was wondering if you might want to grab a drink," I said. "Could use some company, and Jessica's working late again." There was a pause. "She's working late on a Friday night." "Apparently so." Another pause, longer this time. "Where do you want to meet?" We met at a quiet wine bar in downtown Phoenix, the kind of place with exposed brick walls and soft lighting that encouraged honest conversation. Amanda arrived looking elegant in a black dress that showed off her petite frame and dark hair. She'd always been beautiful. But tonight, there was something different about the way she carried herself, more confident and self-assured. "You look amazing," I said as she slid into the booth across from me. "Thank you," she replied, studying my face. "You look different too. New haircut. New everything, actually." "What's going on, Ryan? Don't tell me nothing, because I can see it in your eyes." I'd known Amanda for almost as long as I'd known Jessica, and she'd always been perceptive. There was no point in pretending. "Jessica's having an affair," I said simply. Amanda's wine glass stopped halfway to her lips. "What?" "With her boss? Brad Coleman. They're probably together right now while she thinks I'm at home watching Netflix and feeling sorry for myself." "Oh, Ryan." Amanda's voice was soft with sympathy. "I'm so sorry. How did you find out?" I told her about the anniversary. Dinner, the research I'd done, the evidence I'd gathered. As I talked, I watched Amanda's expression shift from surprise to anger to something that looked almost like relief. "I was wondering when you'd figure it out," she said finally. "You knew?" I suspected. "Jessica's been different lately. It's more secretive, more selfish. She used to talk about you and Sophie all the time, but recently it's been all Brad this and Brad that." Amanda took a long sip of wine. "Plus, she's been lying to me too." "About what?" "She told me she was having dinner with you last weekend. But when I drove by your house, your car wasn't there. And when I asked her about it later, she got defensive and changed the subject." "Where was she?" "I have a pretty good idea now." We sat in comfortable silence for a moment, processing the reality of Jessica's betrayal. But there was something else in the air between us, an electricity that had nothing to do with my failed marriage. "Can I ask you something?" Amanda said eventually. "Anything? Are you okay?" I mean, really okay, not just putting on a brave face. I considered the question seriously. You know what? I think I am. For the first time in years, I feel like myself again. The Ryan who built a successful business, who used to take risks, who didn't apologize for existing. Amanda smiled. "I remember that Ryan. I always wondered what happened to him. Jessica happened to him, but he's back now." "A good Amanda," said, raising her glass, "because I missed him." The toast felt significant, like we were acknowledging something that had been simmering beneath the surface for years. Amanda had always been the friend I connected with more easily, the one who laughed at my jokes and seemed genuinely interested in my thoughts and opinions. I'd assumed it was just friendship, but sitting across from her now, I realized there might have been more to it. "Amanda," I said carefully, "can I ask you something personal?" Sure. Have you ever wondered what might have happened if we'd met before Jessica and I got together? She looked down at her wine, a slight blush coloring her cheeks. Maybe once or twice, she admitted. Just once or twice. Okay, maybe more than that. She looked up and met my eyes. But you were with Jessica, and she was my best friend. Some lines you don't cross. And now, no. I'm not sure Jessica deserves that kind of loyalty. The conversation continued for another 2 hours, covering everything from our college years to our career ambitions to our shared frustration. With Jessica's increasingly self-centered behavior, by the time we left the wine bar, something fundamental had shifted between us. Thank you, I said, as we stood beside Amanda's car in the parking garage. For what? For reminding me that not everyone in my life has been taking me for granted. Amanda stepped closer. Close enough that I could smell her perfume, something light and floral that was nothing like Jessica's heavy, expensive scent. Ryan, she said softly, I need you to know something. Whatever happens with Jessica, whatever you decide to do about your marriage, you deserve better than what you've been accepting. So do you, I replied, and I meant it. Amanda had been single for 3 years, claiming she was too busy building her design business to date seriously. But I suspected the real reason was that she'd been waiting for someone worth her time. She reached up and touched my cheek gently. See you soon? Definitely. I drove home feeling more alive than I had in years. Jessica's car wasn't in the driveway when I arrived, which meant she was still maintaining the fiction of her work meeting. I didn't care. For the first time since our anniversary dinner, I was looking forward to tomorrow. The house felt different when I walked in, lighter somehow. I poured myself a scotch and sat in my office, looking at the family photos that had once made me sad. Now they just looked like pictures of a life that was ending, making room for something better to begin. Jessica came home at nearly midnight, slipping into bed beside me like nothing had happened. I pretended to be asleep, listening to her settle. In next to me, probably exhausted from her evening with Brad, part of me wanted to confront her right then, to end the charade and force her to face the consequences of her choices. But I'd learned something important tonight. Patience was a weapon, and timing was everything. Jessica thought she was playing me, but she was about to discover that the game had rules she didn't know about. I'd been studying them very carefully. Tomorrow, I'd start making moves that would change everything. But tonight, I'd let her think she was still in control. It was going to make her fall that much more satisfying. The following Monday morning arrived with the crisp October air that made Phoenix bearable again after the scorching summer months. I woke up before my alarm, feeling energized in a way I hadn't experienced in years. Jessica was already in the shower, preparing for what she'd described as a crucial week at the bank. Little did she know, it would indeed be crucial, just not in the way she expected. Over breakfast, Sophie chattered about her upcoming school science fair while Jessica scrolled through her phone, responding to what I assumed were messages from Brad. The domestic scene felt surreal, like watching actors perform a play about a family that no longer existed. Daddy, will you help me with my volcano project tonight? Sophie asked, spreading strawberry jam on her toast with the precision of a surgeon. Absolutely, I replied, ruffling her hair. We'll make it the best volcano Jefferson Elementary has ever seen. Jessica glanced up from her phone. I might be late again tonight. Big presentation tomorrow for the board of directors. On a Tuesday? I asked with feigned confusion. That seems unusual. Brad wants everything perfect, she said, not meeting my eyes. You know how important this is for his career? Of course, his career is definitely the priority. She shot me a sharp look, but I kept my expression neutral as I finished my coffee. The beauty of knowing the truth was that I could speak honestly while she scrambled to maintain her lies. After dropping Sophie at school, I drove to Amanda's design studio in the Arts District. Torres Interior Design occupied a converted warehouse, space with soaring ceilings and large windows that flooded the showroom with natural light. Amanda had built something impressive here, combining artistic vision with business acumen in a way that reminded me of my own entrepreneurial journey. You're early, Amanda said, looking up from a fabric selection spread across her desk. She wore a flowing white blouse and dark jeans, professional yet approachable. And when she smiled at me, I felt that same spark I'd experienced at the wine bar. I wanted to catch you before your day got busy, I said. I have a proposition for you. I'm listening. How would you feel about taking on the biggest interior design project of your career? Amanda's eyebrows rose with interest. Wait. Kind of project? A complete renovation of Mitchell & Park's new headquarters? We're expanding, moving to a larger space downtown, and we want someone who understands modern professional aesthetics. It wasn't entirely true yet, but Kevin and I had been discussing expansion for months. It now seemed like the perfect time to make it happen, especially if it meant working closely with Amanda. That sounds amazing, she said, her excitement genuine. When would you want to start? Immediately. But there's something else I need to tell you first. I explained my situation with Jessica in more detail, the evidence I'd gathered, and my plans for the divorce proceedings. Amanda listened without judgment, occasionally asking clarifying questions that showed she was thinking strategically about the implications. So you want to work together while you're going through a divorce from my best friend? She said when I finished. Former best friend, from what you told me Friday night? Amanda was quiet for a moment, considering. You're right, but Jessica I've been friends with for 15 years wouldn't lie to me about her whereabouts, or treat her husband like an inconvenience. This version of her isn't someone I recognize anymore. People change, I said. Sometimes not for the better. And sometimes change reveals who someone really was all along. We spent the next hour discussing the design project, but the conversation kept circling back to Jessica and Brad. Our shared frustration with people who thought they could manipulate others without consequences. Can I ask you something, Amanda? Said as we looked at potential color schemes. What's your endgame here? You looking for revenge, or are you just trying to protect yourself? Both, I said honestly. I want Jessica to face consequences for her choices, but I also want to build something better for myself and Sophie. I spent 10 years trying to be the perfect husband for someone who didn't appreciate it. Now I want to see what happens when I focus on my own happiness. And what would make you happy? The question hung in the air between us, loaded with implications we both understood. I looked at Amanda, really looked at her, taking in the intelligence in her dark eyes, the way she carried herself with quiet confidence, the genuine warmth in her smile when she wasn't guarding herself. I'm starting to figure that out, I said. The moment was interrupted by Amanda's phone buzzing with a text message. She glanced at it and frowned. Jessica, she said. She wants to have lunch today. Says she needs to talk to someone about relationship problems. Interesting timing. Should I go? I thought about it for a moment, yes. But don't tell her we've been talking. I'd rather keep that between us for now. What if she asks about you directly? Tell her I seem fine. Better than fine, actually. Let her wonder what that means. Amanda agreed to the lunch meeting, and we arranged to continue our design discussions later that week. As I left her studio, I felt like pieces of a larger puzzle were starting to fall into place. Jessica was beginning to sense that something had shifted, which meant she was starting to feel uncertain about her position. That uncertainty would lead to mistakes, and mistakes would give me the leverage I needed. My next stop was Kevin's office, where we had a meeting scheduled with our accountant to discuss the financial implications of my divorce. Mitchell & Park Agency had grown substantially over the past 5 years, and I needed to ensure that Jessica couldn't claim half of something she'd had nothing to do with building. The good news is that most of your business assets are protected, said Margaret Chen, our accountant and Kevin's cousin. The partnership agreement you and Kevin signed clearly delineates ownership percentages and includes provisions for personal life changes. What about the house? Kevin asked. That's more complicated. Since it was purchased during the marriage with marital funds, Jessica would typically be entitled to half the equity. However, if we can demonstrate that the down payment came from business profits that Ryan generated independently, I kept all the records, I said. The down payment came from a bonus I earned for landing the Henderson Group account before Jessica and I had joint finances. Margaret nodded approvingly. That helps significantly. Combined with evidence of adultery, a judge might be inclined to award you a larger portion of the marital assets. We spent another hour going through every detail of my financial situation, ensuring that I was protected regardless of how contentious the divorce became. By the time I left the meeting, I felt confident that Jessica's betrayal wouldn't result. in her being rewarded with half of everything I'd worked to build? That afternoon, I received a call from Carlos Torres with an update on the preliminary divorce paperwork. I've had my investigator do some additional research on Brad Coleman, Carlos said. What we found is very interesting. Tell me. Currently under investigation by the bank's Human Resources Department for inappropriate conduct with subordinates. Apparently this isn't the first time he's become involved with an employee. There's a pattern of behavior that the bank is finally taking seriously. I felt a surge of satisfaction. How serious? Serious enough that his promotion might be in jeopardy. The bank is conducting a full review of his professional conduct. And if they find evidence of harassment or favoritism, he could face termination. And Jessica. If they can prove she received preferential treatment because of their relationship, she could face disciplinary action as well, possibly termination, depending on bank policy. This was better than I'd hoped. Not only would I be able to divorce Jessica and protect my assets, but both she and Brad might face professional consequences for their affair. Justice was starting to feel within reach. There's something else, Carlos continued. I think we should consider making the divorce public knowledge sooner rather than later. Jessica thinks she can continue the affair quietly while maintaining her marriage. She might make even more reckless decisions. Oh, what do you have in mind? A strategic leak to the right people. Nothing illegal or unethical, just making sure that the truth reaches people who need to know it. I thought about Amanda's lunch with Jessica, about the performance my wife was probably putting on right now. Playing the victim of an inattentive husband while secretly planning her future with Brad? Do it, I said. That evening, I picked up Sophie from her after-school program and took her to dinner at her favorite pizza place. We sat in a booth decorated with pictures of vintage cars, sharing a pepperoni pizza, and talking about everything except the drama unfolding in our household. Daddy, Sophie said, as she expertly pulled the cheese off her slice. Are you happier lately? The question caught me off guard. What makes you ask that? You smile more? You don't look sad when you think I'm not watching? Children saw everything, I realized. Sophie had been observing the dynamics in our house with the clarity that only comes from innocence. I am happier, I said honestly. Sometimes grown-ups go through difficult periods, but they can also learn and grow from those experiences. Like when I was sad about not making the soccer team, but then I joined art club and discovered I love painting. Goes exactly like that. Sophie nodded sagely, as if this made perfect sense to her 8-year-old worldview. I'm glad you're happy, Daddy. You're more fun when you're happy. After dinner, we went home and worked on her volcano project. Mixing baking soda and vinegar to create spectacular eruptions in the backyard. Sophie shrieked with delight each time the foam shot out of the paper mache mountain, and I found myself genuinely laughing for the first time in months. Jessica arrived home just as we were cleaning up, looking frazzled and irritated. She barely acknowledged Sophie's excited explanation of the volcano experiment. Mumbling something about being tired and needing to prepare for tomorrow's presentation. How was lunch with Amanda? Asked casually as Jessica gathered her work papers from the kitchen counter. Fine, she said curtly. Why, just wondering. You two haven't spent much time together lately. Jessica's hands stilled on her papers. We both have busy lives, Ryan. Some of us can't just leave work early whenever we feel like it. The comment was meant to be cutting, but it bounced off me harmlessly. I was no longer the man who would apologize for spending time with his daughter, or feel guilty for not working late enough to satisfy his wife's impossible standards. You're right, I said cheerfully. Some of us are more dedicated to our responsibilities than others. She shot me a sharp look, clearly sensing the double meaning in my words. But before she could respond, Sophie bounded into the kitchen with her volcano project. Mommy, look what Daddy and I made. It erupts and everything. Jessica glanced at the project with distracted irritation. That's nice, sweetheart. Daddy, can you make sure she gets to bed on time? I have important work to finish. Of course, I said. Family responsibilities are always my priority. After putting Sophie to bed, I retreated to my office and called Amanda to check in on her lunch with Jessica. That was enlightening, Amanda said, and I could hear the exhaustion in her voice. Bad enlightening or good enlightening? Disturbing enlightening? Ryan, she's completely convinced herself that she's the victim in this situation. According to Jessica, You've been distant and inattentive for months. You don't appreciate her career ambitions, and you're jealous of her success at work. Did she mention Brad specifically? Oh, yes. He's become her savior, the one person who truly understands her potential and values her contributions. She's head over heels, Ryan, completely infatuated. I felt a strange mix of relief and disgust. Relief that Jessica had revealed the extent of her delusion, and disgust that she'd so thoroughly rewritten our marriage history to justify her betrayal. Did she say anything about me seeming different lately? Actually, yes. She said you've been acting strange. More confident, but also more distant. She thinks you might be having a midlife crisis. I laughed, genuinely amused. Midlife crisis. That's what she's calling self-respect now, Amanda said, her voice growing serious. There's something else. She asked me if I thought she should leave you. What did you tell her? I told her that marriage is a commitment that shouldn't be abandoned lightly, and that maybe she should try talking to you honestly about whatever problem she thinks you're having. Good answer, but here's the thing. She didn't seem interested in working on the marriage at all. She kept steering the conversation back to how wonderful Brad is, how he makes her feel appreciated and valued. She's already mentally checked. Out of your relationship, Ryan, she's just looking for permission to make it official. This confirmation of what I already suspected still stung, but it also crystallized my resolve. Jessica had made her choice long before our anniversary dinner. She'd just been too cowardly to admit it directly. Thank you for doing that, I said. I know it couldn't have been easy. It wasn't. But it helped me see clearly who Jessica has become. The friend I cared about wouldn't treat someone the way she's treating you. People show you who they really are when they think they can get away with it. Speaking of which, Amanda said, I have some news about our design project. I've been thinking about it all day and I'm in. Whatever happens with Jessica, I want to work with you on this expansion. Even if it creates complications. Especially if it creates complications. I'm tired of tiptoeing around other people's insecurities and poor choices. We talked for another hour about business plans and design concepts, but underneath, the professional discussion was a growing personal connection that we were both beginning to acknowledge. Amanda was everything Jessica wasn't. Honest, supportive, genuinely interested in my thoughts and opinions, and confident enough in herself that she didn't need to diminish others to feel important. After we hung up, I sat in my office, reviewing the evidence I'd gathered against Jessica and Brad. Photos, text message records, timeline documentation, financial records showing unexplained expenses that likely related to their affair. It was comprehensive enough to support a strong divorce case, but more importantly, it was comprehensive enough to destroy the fairy tale Jessica had constructed in her mind. Tomorrow, I would begin the process of showing Jessica and Brad that actions have consequences, and that underestimating someone was often the first step toward losing everything. They'd built their relationship on lies and betrayal, conducted their affair with arrogant confidence that I was too trusting and too weak to discover the truth. They were about to learn how wrong they'd been about both my intelligence and my capacity for strategic thinking. But more than that, they were about to discover that the devoted husband and accommodating friend they'd taken for granted had been replaced by someone who understood that respect was earned, not freely given, and that some betrayals deserved to be met with consequences that matched their severity. The game was changing, and for the first time since this whole mess began, I was the one setting the rules. The first domino fell on a Wednesday morning at exactly 9:47 a.m. when Carlos Torres called with news that would reshape everything. Bank received an anonymous tip about Brad Coleman's relationship with a subordinate. He said, his voice carrying barely contained satisfaction. They've launched a formal investigation, and both Brad and Jessica have been called in for separate interviews this afternoon. I was sitting in my BMW outside Sophie's school, having just dropped her off for what would turn out to be one of the most significant days of our lives. The autumn morning was crisp and clear, the kind of weather that made everything feel possible. How anonymous, I asked. Anonymous enough. Let's just say that someone with knowledge of banking regulations and employment law felt compelled to share their concerns about potential violations of company policy. The beauty of Carlos's approach was its elegance. Nothing illegal, nothing that could be traced back to me, just the strategic application of truth to people who needed to hear it. Sometimes justice required a gentle nudge in the right direction. What happens next? Now we wait and see how they handle being questioned separately. In my experience, people who are conducting affairs rarely have their stories perfectly aligned when they're under pressure. After ending the call, I drove to Mitchell & Park Agency with a sense of anticipation I hadn't felt since the early days of building the business. Kevin was waiting for me with coffee and the kind of grin that meant he had news. "You're going to love this," he said, handing me a mug. "Remember how you asked me to keep an eye on our banking relationships? What did you find?" Southwest Regional Bank has been quietly reviewing all their commercial accounts for potential conflicts of interest. Apparently, there's been some concern about loan officers showing favoritism to certain clients. The implications hit me immediately. Jessica had been handling commercial accounts, including some that involved significant loans to local businesses. If the bank discovered that her judgment had been compromised by her relationship with Brad, every decision she'd made could be called into question. How significant are we talking? Significant enough that the bank might face regulatory scrutiny. If they can't demonstrate that all loan decisions were made based on merit rather than personal relationships, I felt that familiar surge of satisfaction that came with watching a carefully constructed plan come together. Jessica and Brad had been so focused on their romance that they'd ignored the professional landmine they were creating. Now that landmine was about to explode in spectacular fashion. "There's something else," Kevin continued. "Amanda Torres called this morning. She wants to move forward with the headquarters renovation project immediately. Says she's had some inspiration and wants to create something that reflects the new direction of the company." The new direction of the company. I liked the sound of that. I spent the morning reviewing proposals for our expanded office space, a converted warehouse in the Arts District that would triple our square footage and position us perfectly for the growth Kevin and I had been planning. Amanda had already submitted preliminary design concepts that were ambitious and sophisticated. It's a kind of space that would attract top-tier clients and talent. But more than that, working with Amanda felt like building something meaningful, with someone who shared my vision and values. Every conversation we'd had reinforced my growing conviction that I'd spent 10 years with the wrong person, trying to force compatibility where none existed. At lunch, I met Amanda at a small cafe near her studio to review the design proposals. She dressed professionally in a navy blazer and cream blouse, but there was something different about her energy today, more focused and determined. "I've been thinking about what you said yesterday," she began, as we settled into a corner booth, "about building something better for yourself and Sophie. And I want to be part of that, not just professionally, but personally, too." The directness of her statement caught me off guard, even though I'd been hoping she felt the same growing connection I did. "Amanda, you know how complicated this situation is. The divorce hasn't even been filed yet, and Jessica considers you her best friend." "Considered," Amanda corrected. Past tense. "After our lunch yesterday, I realized that the Jessica I've been loyal to for 15 years doesn't exist anymore. Maybe she never existed, and I just saw what I wanted to see." She reached across the table and took my hand, her fingers warm and steady against mine. "Ryan, I've spent 3 years telling myself I was too busy for a relationship. It's too focused on building my business to make time for romance. But the truth is, I was waiting. I was waiting for someone who would appreciate what I bring to the table, who wouldn't expect me to diminish myself to make them feel more important. And you think that someone is me? I know it is. The question is whether you're ready to stop punishing yourself for Jessica's choices and start building the life you actually want." Before I could respond, my phone buzzed with a text message. From Carlos. Interview complete. Jessica requesting emergency meeting. Brad suspended pending investigation. I showed Amanda the message and she squeezed my hand tighter. "Starting," she said. "Are you sure you want to be involved in this? Once I file for divorce, once this becomes public, there's no going back." Amanda smiled, and there was something fierce and determined in her expression that reminded me why I'd been drawn to her in the first place. I've never been more sure of anything in my life. We spent the rest of lunch discussing the renovation timeline and the logistics of our evolving relationship. Amanda would finish her current projects over the next month while we finalized the new office lease. We'd keep our personal relationship private until the divorce was filed. But we both understood that we were moving toward something real and lasting. "There's something else we need to discuss," Amanda said as we prepared to leave. "Jessica called me an hour ago. She wants to have dinner tonight. Says she needs someone to talk to about a crisis at work. Are you going to see her?" "Yes, but this time I'm going to be honest with her. She needs to know that her actions have consequences, and that some of those consequences involve losing people who used to support her unconditionally." The thought of Amanda confronting Jessica filled me with both admiration and concern. Amanda was strong and capable, but Jessica could be vicious when cornered, especially if she suspected that someone was choosing me over her. "Be careful," I said. "Jessica doesn't handle rejection well, and she's going to be desperate after today's interview." "I can handle Jessica," Amanda replied with quiet confidence. "I've been handling her dramatic crises for years. The difference is that this time, I'm not going to enable her victim narrative." That afternoon, I received the call I'd been expecting. Jessica's voice was high and strained, barely controlled panic bleeding through her attempt to sound normal. "Ryan, can you come home early today? I need to talk to you about something important." "What's wrong? Just, can you please come home? I'd rather discuss this in person." I could have prolonged her anxiety, made her wait until evening, when I would normally return from work, but I was curious to see how she would try to spin the day's events. What story she would construct to explain away the investigation and Brad's suspension. "I'll be there in an hour," I said. The drive home gave me time to prepare mentally for what would likely be a performance worthy of an Academy Award. Jessica would need someone to blame for her predicament. Someone to play the role of supportive husband while she figured out how to salvage her career and her relationship with Brad. Unfortunately for her, that version of Ryan Mitchell no longer existed. I found Jessica pacing in our living room, still wearing the conservative navy suit she'd chosen for her interview with HR. Her hair was disheveled, her makeup smudged, and there was a wildness in her eyes that spoke of someone whose carefully constructed world was collapsing. "Thank God you're here," she said, rushing toward me with the kind of desperate affection she hadn't shown in months. "I've had the most terrible day, and I need your support." "What happened?" "Someone at the bank made a complaint about Brad and me. They're saying there's some kind of inappropriate relationship, which is absolutely ridiculous. Brad has always been completely professional with everyone in the department." I sat down on the couch, maintaining a calm expression, while Jessica continued her frantic explanation. "They asked me all these personal questions about my interactions with Brad, about whether I'd received any special treatment or preferential assignments. It was humiliating, Ryan. They treated me like some kind of criminal." "That does sound difficult," I said neutrally. "The worst part is that they've suspended Brad pending their investigation. His career could be ruined over this. And for what? Because someone is jealous of our professional relationship?" The irony was breathtaking. Jessica was so deep in her own delusions that she genuinely seemed to believe her affair was simply a professional relationship that others had misunderstood. "What exactly did you tell them during the interview?" "The truth, of course. Brad and I work closely together because we're both dedicated to the success of the department. And any extra time we spend together is purely business-related, and they believed that." Jessica's confident facade cracked slightly. "They said they need to review all the documentation of my loan decisions over the past 6 months. They want to make sure there wasn't any bias in my evaluations." If Jessica had approved loans, or made recommendations based on her relationship with Brad rather than purely financial criteria, the bank could face serious regulatory problems. And Jessica could face criminal charges. "I'm sure everything will work out fine," I said, careful to keep my voice supportive. "After all, you've always been ethical and professional in your work." "Of course I have," Jessica said quickly, but I caught the flicker of uncertainty in her eyes. "It's just, some of the decisions we made might be difficult to explain to people who don't understand the complexity of commercial lending." "What kind of decisions?" "Nothing inappropriate," she said defensively. "Just, Brad sometimes asked for my opinion on loan applications, and I might have been more favorable towards certain clients because I trusted his judgment. I nodded thoughtfully, filing away this admission for future use. Jessica had just confirmed that she'd compromised her professional obligations for Brad. Exactly the kind of ethical violation that could end her career. Well, I'm sure the investigation will clear everything up, I said. In the meantime, is there anything I can do to support you? Jessica looked at me with surprise, as if she'd expected me to be more upset or suspicious about the situation. Actually, yes, I was thinking. Maybe we should plan a vacation. Get away from all this. Stress and reconnect as a couple. I know I've been working too much lately, and I want to make it up to you. The manipulation was so transparent it was almost insulting. Jessica was trying to use our marriage as cover for her affair, to create the appearance of a solid relationship, while she and Brad weathered the investigation. That sounds wonderful, I said with enthusiasm that made her visibly relax. Where were you thinking? Maybe somewhere romantic? Paris or Italy? Somewhere we can remember why we fell in love. I'd love that, Jessica. But shouldn't we wait until this situation at work is resolved? It might look strange if you took a vacation right after being questioned by HR. Her face fell as she realized I was right. Taking a romantic trip with her husband while under investigation for an affair with her boss would send exactly the wrong message to the bank's investigators. You're probably right, she said reluctantly. Maybe we should wait. In the meantime, though, I want you to know that I'm here for you. Whatever happens with this investigation, we'll face it together. Jessica's eyes filled with tears, and for a moment I almost felt sorry for her. She was trapped in a situation of her own making, watching her carefully constructed lies crumble around her. And the only person offering her support was the husband she'd been betraying for months. Thank you, Ryan. I know I haven't been the best wife lately, but I promise things are going to change. This whole mess has made me realize what's really important. And what's that? Our family, our marriage, you and Sophie, are what matter most, not my career or anything else. It was exactly what I would have wanted to hear 6 months ago, when I was still naive enough to believe that Jessica's problems were temporary and that our marriage could be saved with enough effort and understanding. Now, listening to her promised changes she had no intention of making, I felt nothing but cold satisfaction. I'm glad to hear that, I said, standing up from the couch. Now I should go pick up Sophie from her after-school program. You rest and try to put this stressful day behind you? Will you be home for dinner? Actually, I have a business meeting tonight. Kevin and I are discussing the expansion project with some potential investors, but I'll be home later to tuck Sophie in. Jessica's face showed a flicker of annoyance, quickly suppressed. She'd been counting on having me available for emotional support all evening, and my refusal to cancel my plans left her alone with her anxiety. Of course, she said with forced understanding, your business is important too. As I left the house, I called Amanda to confirm our dinner plans. 8. Moved her meeting with Jessica to earlier in the afternoon, and her voice carried a note of grim satisfaction when she answered. How did it go? I asked. Better than expected. Jessica is completely falling apart, and she made some very interesting admissions about her relationship with Brad, such as the fact that they've been intimate for months, that she's been helping him with personnel decisions that affected other employees, and that she's genuinely convinced herself that she's in love with him. This was even better than I'd hoped. If Amanda had recordings or documentation of these admissions, they could be devastating in divorce proceedings. Did you record the conversation? I didn't need to. Jessica was so desperate to justify herself that she sent me a long text message. Afterward, explaining why she had to follow her heart and how she hoped I would understand her decision to leave you for Brad. I felt a surge of adrenaline. Jessica had just provided written evidence of her affair and her intention to end our marriage. Combined with the bank investigation and the evidence I'd already gathered, I now had everything I needed to destroy her completely. Amanda, you're incredible. Just getting started. Tonight at dinner, we're going to discuss the timeline for your divorce filing and how we're going to coordinate the revelation of all this evidence for maximum impact. That evening, Amanda and I met at an upscale restaurant downtown, the kind of place that attracted Phoenix's business elite and social influencers. We chose it deliberately, knowing that word of our dinner together would eventually reach Jessica through mutual acquaintances. Amanda looked stunning in a black dress that showcased her figure and her confidence. She'd styled her hair differently, softer and more romantic. And when she smiled at me across the candlelit table, I felt like the luckiest man in the city. "Two new beginnings," she said, raising her wine glass. "To justice," I replied, and we clinked glasses with the satisfaction of people who knew they were on the winning side. Over dinner, we finalized our strategy for the coming weeks. I would file for divorce the following Monday, using Jessica's text message to Amanda as key evidence of adultery. Amanda would publicly end her friendship with Jessica, making it clear that she found Jessica's behavior morally reprehensible, and we would both begin openly dating, showing Phoenix society that we were moving forward with our lives while Jessica and Brad dealt with the consequences of their choices. "There's something else," Amanda said as we shared dessert. "Got a call today from Nicole Coleman, Brad's ex-wife." "What did she want?" "We thanked me for finally speaking up about the affair. Apparently she's been trying to get people to take Brad's behavior seriously for months, but everyone dismissed her concerns as the bitterness of a divorced woman." "What's her story?" "Brad cheated on her repeatedly throughout their marriage, always with women he worked with or met through business connections. He has a pattern of targeting vulnerable women who depend on him professionally, manipulating them emotionally while using them to advance his career. And Jessica fit that pattern perfectly." "Exactly. Nicole thinks Jessica is just his latest victim. But I told her that Jessica made her own choices and deserves whatever consequences come from them." The conversation continued late into the evening, covering everything from our future business plans to our growing personal relationship. By the time we left the restaurant, I felt like a completely different person from the man who'd sat through that anniversary dinner just 2 weeks ago. That night, I returned home to find Jessica waiting up for me, anxiety etched across her features. "How was your meeting?" she asked. "Productive," I said. "We're moving forward with some exciting new projects." "That's good. I'm glad work is going well for you." She seemed to want to say more, but I headed upstairs to check on Sophie, and then retreated to my office to review the divorce paperwork Carlos had prepared. Everything was ready. In 4 days, Jessica's world would officially begin to crumble, and she would finally face the consequences of believing that other people existed solely to serve her needs and desires. As I sat in my office, reviewing the evidence that would soon become public record, I felt a deep sense of satisfaction that had nothing to do with revenge and everything to do with justice. Jessica and Brad had built their relationship on lies, betrayal, and the exploitation of trust. Now they would learn that actions have consequences, and that some mistakes cost more than people are prepared to pay. But more importantly, I was building something new and genuine with Amanda, something based on mutual respect, shared values, and the kind of honest connection I'd never had with Jessica. Whatever happened in the coming weeks, I knew I was finally moving toward the life I deserved rather than the life I'd settled for. The game was almost over, and I was about to win everything that mattered. Monday morning arrived with the kind of crystal-clear Arizona sky that made everything seem possible. I stood in my new downtown loft, adjusting my tie in front of the floor-to-ceiling windows that overlooked the Phoenix skyline. The apartment was temporary. It's a strategic choice that allowed me to be closer to the office while the divorce proceedings unfolded. But it felt more like home than the Scottsdale house ever had. At exactly 9 a.m., Carlos Torres would file the divorce papers at the Maricopa County Courthouse. By 9:30, Jessica would receive official notification at Southwest Regional Bank. In front of her colleagues, during what she thought was going to be a routine Monday morning staff meeting, the timing was deliberate and devastating. My phone buzzed with a text from Amanda. "Coffee ready when you arrive." Today changes everything. She was right. After weeks of careful planning and strategic moves, today marked the beginning of the final chapter. Jessica's fairy tale was about to become a very public nightmare, and she would discover that the husband she'd taken for granted had been playing a much deeper game than she'd ever imagined. I arrived at Torres Interior Design to find Amanda reviewing architectural plans for our new headquarters. She looked radiant in an emerald green dress that complemented her dark hair, and when she looked up at me, her smile carried the confidence of someone who knew she was exactly where she belonged. "Nervous?" she asked, handing me a cup of coffee prepared exactly the way I liked it. "Excited," I replied, surprising myself with the honesty. For the first time in years, I feel like I'm moving towards something instead of just trying to hold something together. Good, because after today, there's no going back. We spent the morning reviewing the renovation timeline for Mitchell and Park's expansion. The new space would be 3 times larger than our current office, with Amanda's design creating an environment that reflected innovation, success, and forward momentum. Every detail spoke to the life I was building rather than the one I was leaving behind. At 9:15, my phone rang. Carlos Torres, calling with confirmation. "Papers filed," he said simply. "Jessica should be receiving notification right about now." I imagined the scene at Southwest Regional Bank, Jessica sitting in the conference room with her colleagues, opening an envelope that would shatter her carefully constructed reality. The divorce petition was comprehensive and damaging, citing adultery with specific dates and evidence, requesting full custody of Sophie, and demanding a complete financial audit of all marital assets. But more devastating than the legal language would be the realization that I'd known everything for weeks, that I'd been playing a strategic game while she thought she was manipulating a fool. "What happens next?" Amanda asked. "Now we wait for her to make the mistakes we know she's going to make." Jessica's first mistake came within an hour. My phone exploded with calls and text messages, each one more desperate and accusatory than the last. She'd left work immediately after receiving the papers, claiming a family emergency, and was apparently driving around Phoenix in a state of panic. "How could you do this to me?" read one text. "After everything I've done for our family." "Destroying Sophie's life out of jealousy and spite," read another. "Call me immediately. We need to talk about this like adults." I showed the messages to Amanda, who shook her head in amazement. Even now, she's trying to make herself the victim. The messages escalated throughout the morning, becoming increasingly irrational and revealing. Jessica admitted to seeking comfort from Brad during our difficult period, blamed me for being emotionally unavailable, and threatened to fight for every penny in the divorce settlement. Each message was being forwarded directly to Carlos Torres, building our case. With Jessica's own words, "At noon, Brad Coleman made his own strategic error. He called me directly, his voice tight with barely controlled rage. 'Mitchell, we need to talk. This situation has gotten completely out of hand.' Not sure what situation you're referring to," I said calmly. "Don't play games with me. This divorce filing is affecting Jessica's emotional state, and that affects her ability to support me during the bank investigation." The arrogance was breathtaking. Even facing professional ruin, Brad was primarily concerned with how Jessica's crisis would impact his own situation. "I'm sorry to hear Jessica is struggling," I said. "Divorce is never easy, especially when it involves adultery. Look, what happened between Jessica and me was never meant to hurt anyone. We tried to fight our feelings, but sometimes these things just happen." I gestured to Amanda, who quickly started recording the call on her phone. "So you're admitting to having an affair with my wife?" There was a long pause as Brad realized his mistake. "I'm saying that Jessica and I developed feelings for each other during a difficult time in your marriage. If you hadn't been so neglectful, none of this would have happened." It's an interesting perspective. "I'm sure the bank's investigators will find that explanation compelling." "What's that supposed to mean?" "It means that a senior banking executive conducting an affair with a subordinate while making personnel and financial decisions together creates significant liability for the institution. But I'm sure you've already considered that." Another pause, longer this time. When Brad spoke again, his voice had lost its confident edge. "What do you want, Mitchell? I want you to stop calling me. I want you to stay away from my daughter. And I want you to accept responsibility for the choices you've made instead of blaming everyone else for the consequences." I hung up before he could respond, feeling a satisfaction that went deeper than mere revenge. For months, Brad and Jessica had treated me like an obstacle to be managed rather than a person deserving respect. Now they were discovering that obstacles could fight back. That afternoon brought news that exceeded even my most optimistic expectations. Carlos called with an update from his contacts at Southwest Regional Bank. Brad Coleman has been terminated, he said, effective immediately. The investigation found evidence of multiple policy violations, including preferential treatment of subordinates, inappropriate use of company resources for personal activities, and failure to disclose conflicts of interest. What about Jessica? She's been placed on administrative leave pending a separate investigation. The bank discovered that several of her loan approvals coincided with personal meetings with Brad outside of work hours. They're reviewing every decision she made over the past 8 months. Criminal charges? Possibly. They can prove that any of those loans were approved based on personal relationships rather than financial merit. Both she and Brad could face fraud charges. The house of cards was collapsing faster than I'd dared to hope. Jessica and Brad's romance had been built on professional misconduct that was finally facing scrutiny. And the consequences were proving far more severe than either of them had anticipated. That evening, I picked up Sophie from her after-school program and took her to dinner at a quiet restaurant where we could talk privately. My daughter had noticed the tension at home, and she deserved to understand what was happening in terms she could process. "Daddy," she said as we shared a plate of nachos, "Mommy was crying when I got home from school today." She said, "You're being mean to her." "I'm not being mean, sweetheart. But Mommy and I are getting divorced, which means we won't be married anymore." Sophie considered this with the seriousness that 8-year-olds brought to important conversations. "Is it because she likes that man from her work better than you?" The perceptiveness of children never ceased to amaze me. "What makes you ask?" "That. She talks about him all the time, and she smiles different when she talks about him. It's not like when she talks about you. You're very observant." "Yes, Mommy has feelings for someone else, and that's one of the reasons we're getting divorced. Will I still live with you?" "I hope so. I want you to live with me most of the time, but you'll still see Mommy regularly." Sophie nodded, apparently satisfied with this arrangement. "Can we still work on science projects together?" "Always." "And will you still help me with my volcano for the science fair?" "Absolutely. We're going to make it the best volcano Jefferson Elementary has ever seen." After dinner, we returned to the house to pack some of Sophie's things for an extended stay at my loft. Jessica was waiting in the living room, her eyes red from crying, looking like a different person from the confident woman who'd celebrated Brad's promotion 2 weeks ago. "Ryan, please," she said as soon as we walked in. "Can we talk privately?" "Sophie, why don't you go upstairs and pick out some clothes for the next few days?" I said gently. Once Sophie was out of earshot, Jessica launched into the most desperate performance of her life. "This is insane, Ryan. You're destroying our family over a misunderstanding." "Yes, I developed feelings for Brad, but I never acted on them inappropriately. We're just friends who work closely together." "Jessica, Brad called me today and admitted to the affair." Her face went white. "He what?" "He told me that you and he developed feelings, and that it was my fault for being neglectful. He also mentioned trying to fight your feelings, which suggests this has been going on for quite some time." Jessica sank onto the couch, her carefully constructed denials crumbling around her. "Ryan, you have to understand. I didn't plan for this to happen. Brad and I just connected in a way that you and I never did. He appreciates me. He values my opinions. He makes me feel important. And what about our marriage vows? What about Sophie? What about the life we built together?" I thought. I hoped I could have both. That I could find happiness with. Brad, while still maintaining our family, the selfishness was staggering, but not surprising. Jessica had always believed that she deserved whatever made her happy, regardless of the cost to others. "Well, now you can't have either," I said. Simply, "Brad's been fired. You're under investigation for professional misconduct, and our marriage is over. This is all your fault." She screamed, her composure finally breaking completely. "If you had been a better husband, if you had paid attention to me, if you had made me feel valued, none of this would have happened." "You're right," I said. and she looked startled by my agreement. If I had been a better husband, I would have ended this marriage years ago instead of wasting time trying to please someone who was incapable of appreciation or loyalty. Sophie appeared at the top of the stairs with her packed bag, having heard the raised voices. I went up to get her, leaving Jessica sobbing in the living room. "Is Mommy okay?" Sophie asked as we walked to my car. "Mommy is very sad right now because her life is changing in ways she didn't expect. But sometimes change is necessary even when it's difficult. Will she be okay eventually?" "I think so. But it might take her a while to understand that her choices have consequences." That night, Sophie and I set up her temporary room in my loft, complete with her favorite stuffed animals and the volcano project we'd been working on together. I tucked her into bed. She looked up at me with the kind of serious expression. That reminded me why everything I'd done was worth it. "Daddy, are you happier now?" "I'm getting there, sweetheart. Sometimes adults have to make difficult decisions to protect the people they love most. Like me? Especially like you?" Over the following weeks, Jessica's world continued to collapse in spectacular fashion. The bank's investigation concluded that she had indeed shown favoritism in her loan decisions, proving questionable applications based on Brad's recommendations rather than proper financial analysis. Several of those loans had already defaulted, costing the bank substantial money and triggering regulatory scrutiny. Criminal charges were filed against both Jessica and Brad for bank fraud and conspiracy. Their romantic affair had become a federal case, literally. And the media attention was devastating to both their reputations and their prospects for future employment in the financial industry. Jessica's attempts to gain custody of Sophie were unsuccessful, partly because of her criminal charges and partly because Sophie herself expressed a clear preference for living with me.
Ow.
The custody evaluation revealed that I had been Sophie's primary caregiver throughout most of her life, while Jessica had been increasingly absent and emotionally unavailable. The financial settlement was more favorable to me than I dared to hope. Jessica's legal fees and potential restitution to the bank left her in no position to fight for half of our assets, and her attorney advised her to accept the terms I offered, rather than risk even worse outcomes at trial. But the most satisfying outcome was personal rather than legal. 6 months after filing for divorce, I married Amanda Torres in a small ceremony at our new headquarters, surrounded by friends and colleagues, who had watched both of us transform from people settling for less than we deserved into partners who brought out the best in each other. Amanda wore a stunning ivory dress she'd designed herself, and Sophie served as our flower girl, beaming with the joy of being part of a family that functioned on love and respect rather than manipulation and conditional affection. "Two new beginnings," Amanda said during our first dance as husband and wife. "To choosing better," I replied, and we both laughed at the understatement. Jessica and Brad's relationship didn't survive the criminal proceedings. Facing potential prison time and financial ruin, they turned on each other with the same selfishness they'd shown everyone else in their lives. Brad blamed Jessica for compromising his career, while Jessica blamed Brad for seducing her into making poor decisions. Both received suspended sentences and community service, but their reputations in Phoenix's banking community were permanently destroyed. Jessica moved to Denver to start over, while Brad relocated to a small town in Nevada where his history was unknown. As for me, I discovered that the best revenge was simply living well. Mitchell & Park Agency thrived in our new headquarters. Amanda's design business grew exponentially through our professional connections, and Sophie flourished in an environment where she was genuinely valued rather than treated as an afterthought. Standing in my office 1 year later, looking out at the Phoenix skyline that had witnessed my transformation from doormat to entrepreneur to husband to someone who understood his own worth, I felt grateful for every painful moment that had led me here. Jessica had done me the greatest favor of her life by showing me who she really was. Her betrayal had forced me to choose between accepting disrespect and demanding better, between settling for convenient lies and pursuing authentic connection, between being someone's victim and being my own hero. I chose better, and that choice changed everything. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click. and check them out.